Today, Alexa is covering the border crossing. We've had reports from New York City that migrants are already making their way to the Canadian border in anticipation of Donald Trump becoming the president. And you've heard his border czar. You've never seen a tougher guy. He says he's basically going to declare war on the cartels and mass deport millions of foreigners. You should see a clip of him. His name is Homan. That's his last name. I think it's Tom Homan, going from memory. And I think he means business. Here's a clip of him.
We have seen one estimate that says it would cost $88 billion to deport 1 million people a year.
I don't know if that's accurate or not.
Is that what American taxpayers should expect?
What price do you put on national security? Is it worth it?
Is there a way to carry out mass deportation without separating families?
Of course there is. Families can be deported together.
Yeah, so let's say you are in the U.S. illegally, either as a criminal or you're there on some status that has not been approved. And that guy who's the toughest, he looks like a bulldog, doesn't he? He says he's going to deport you by the millions. You could try and hide. Okay, it could work. You could voluntarily leave, or you could just walk across the world's largest undefended border into Canada. So get ready for Roxham Road times 10. Roxham Road, not just in Quebec, but in other parts of our border as well. I mean, just for one example, the Haitians. That was a big story in Springfield, Ohio. We sent reporters down to cover it. Tens of thousands of Haitians on a special temporary visa in the U.S. If Trump abolishes that, well, where are they going to go? They could go back to Haiti, one of the worst countries in the world, or they could go to Montreal, where there's a large Haitian community, and we're suckers up here. So yeah, Alexa is going to report on that, and I don't think Canada is ready, and I think Trudeau would rather like being the dumping ground of rejected American applicants, and frankly, he has no opposition to criminals or terrorists coming in the country. He lets them in en masse. It's interesting what Trump is doing. His nominees for different agencies and departments is fascinating. He wants to appoint really radical names. Some of them, like that border czar, has worked in that field before, but others, like Matt Gaetz, the congressman who appointed as Attorney General, and other appointments like Tulsi Gabbard for Director of National Intelligence, they are daring, they are shocking appointees that are proposed appointees that are causing those institutions to quiver. I mean, it's a frontal attack on the deep state. I think a lot of people thought, okay, well, Trump is Trump, but we can manage him. We'll surround him with a buffer, as he was in his first term, of people who are undermining him, slow walking his orders, actually having a kind of mutiny full time. Well, Trump isn't having that. He's putting people in position to fight against the deep state, to go to war against these departments if they don't support the Trump vision. And in fact, I keep reading headlines that some lawyers in the Department of Justice are going to preemptively quit, which I would say is only making Matt Gaetz' job easier. I don't know if these appointees will be approved and confirmed by the U.S. Senate, but I think that Donald Trump is absolutely deadly serious about taking on the permanent bureaucracy, otherwise known as the deep state. Eisenhower called it the military-industrial complex, and keeping his promise. And by the way, having the permanent bureaucracy, the blob, object to Trump and fight against Trump, that only improves Trump's standing in the eyes of his voters who say, oh yeah, he's keeping his promise. I say again, Trump is still almost 2 months away from being sworn in, but it's interesting to see how the world responds. We talked a little bit about this before, but I'm just embarrassed by Trudeau's own response. Of course, I'm embarrassed by Trudeau. Here he is criticizing Tulsi Gabbard. Tulsi Gabbard has been in the U.S. military for more than 2 decades. I think her rank is, they call it lieutenant colonel. We'd say lieutenant colonel in Canada. She is a soldier today. I think she's with the National Guard. I forget what unit. But the U.S. military obviously has no problem with her being an officer in the military. So all these accusations of her being a Russian asset are about, I mean, they're just complete propaganda. But here's Trudeau basically saying, well, we can't trust Trump's appointees. Take a look.
Of course, U.S. nominations are a domestic matter, but they do have implications for Canada. So I want to ask you about one in particular. Tulsi Gabbard as Director of National Intelligence. This is a person who has a long history of defending Vladimir Putin, of justifying the invasion of Ukraine. Also, lots of questions about her personal relationships, travel, financial relationships. Is Canada going to be able to continue to have the intelligence relationship that it has with the United States now, both the bilateral and the Five Eyes relationship, continue to be a consumer of U.S. intelligence and trust what's coming in?
Well, I think these questions you're pointing out are questions that are being asked by an awful lot of people in the United States right now. And they have processes whereby they confirm people, they move forward, they support, they make choices. And I am sure that the American system will continue to demand the right kinds of answers and how they move forward, particularly when it comes to issues of national security. When it comes to keeping Canadians safe, when it comes to keeping Americans safe, our countries can't flinch on that. We have to take these things seriously. And I know Americans take it very seriously, but sometimes political parties do strange things. What comes to mind is the fact that the leader of the official opposition in Canada refuses to get top secret briefings that will allow him to keep his own party and his own members safe. Sometimes political parties make strange choices. And it's the job of citizens to be asking those questions as to why.
This from the guy who has 11 MPs selected by China in the bosom of his government. It's just so gross. Here's Trudeau saying, well, if Trump is backing away from climate extremism, if Trump is going full tilt on fracking and coal and energy, well, if Trump is rejecting climate cultism, that means there's more left for us here in Canada. And sure, if no one else likes carbon taxes, that means more for us. Take a look.
I also wanted to ask you what the election of Donald Trump might mean for climate action. We've seen that Trump has nominated for his energy secretary a fracking executive who's on record as saying there is no climate crisis. Are you worried about where climate action is going with Trump coming in as president, and will you have to do anything differently?
I think we have all seen around the world the impact of climate change, the economic costs of climate change, the impacts on vulnerable populations, the impacts on citizens in the most advanced economies like the poorest economies. And we need everyone to be doing everything we can, particularly the largest emitters, to reduce those emissions so that we can preserve not just a cleaner future, but an economically successful future. So yeah, I'm worried about the U.S. Stepping back on the fight against climate change. But from a Canadian perspective, we have demonstrated and we have seen that fighting climate change can both help directly with affordability, by putting more money in people's pockets with the Canada Carbon Rebate. It's creating tremendous opportunity for growth and investment. We've seen, Canada was number 3 country in the world for foreign direct investment last year. A lot of it because of clean energy, a lot of it because of environmental leadership and responsibility. We have the number 1 EV battery supply chain in the world, according to Bloomberg. And these are things that we have done because we're harnessing the economic opportunities of climate change. And if the United States steps back on the kind of innovation and supports that, for example, we have in our tax credits on clean investment, on innovative energy solutions, then more investment will be coming into Canada. We're already number 1 in the G20 for per capita for foreign direct investment. We've seen foreign direct investment increase by 60% since 2015, largely because of our investments in fighting climate change that are attractive to companies around the world. If people look at the United States as not a place where it's interesting to innovate and fight climate change, people will automatically turn to Canada. And if Mr. Trump doesn't want to take on the opportunities associated with climate change, Canada will continue to.
Yeah, wow. Lots of opportunities. It's just absurd and upside down. What a difference the people that Trump is surrounding himself with versus our low information, low achievement cabinet in Canada. Here's Trudeau staying on the theme, saying that ordinary Canadians who are struggling, making ends meet, struggling, making their rent, making their groceries, they should put climate alarmism ahead of their own family's prosperity. Here's a guy who's never had to pay a bill in his whole life. Look at him telling Canadians to shut up and pay his carbon tax.
The challenge we're facing right now is that the direct pressures on individuals and households, the affordability crisis, being kicked in the teeth by inflation around the world over the past few years, the concerns around the rapid pace of change, the instabilities we're seeing, the shifting geopolitics, the disruptions of the supply chain, have a lot of individual citizens, voters, families really worried that they're not able to make ends meet. And it's really, really easy when you're in a short-term survive, I got to be able to pay the rent this month, I got to be able to buy groceries for my kids, to say, okay, let's put climate change as a slightly lower priority. And that's something that's instinctive. When the storm comes, you want to hunker down and just sort of huddle up and wait for it to blow over. We can't do that around climate change. And unfortunately, we have an awful lot of political amplification of the kind of narrative that is directly opposed to that. It's, some very, very profitable oil and gas companies and entrenched interests that very much want people to, put in opposition affordability and the fight against climate change. And that's really the challenge we have to take on. Everyone sort of understands, oh yes, we need to grow an economy and protect the environment at the same time. But when it comes to putting dollars in pockets for people, they don't want to hear about, if they just, pay a little more for an electric car, then that'll be protecting the environment. They can't pay a little more for an electric car right now. There's a sense that affordability is in direct contrast with our moral responsibility to protect the planet. And that is something that, unfortunately, people have been amplified and used propaganda, misinformation, disinformation, and flat out lies to scare people into saying, oh, no, we got to take care of our household budget and bottom line first and environment second. And that's one of the things that we've really tried to tackle in Canada, because ultimately, even as we talk about global collective action and responsibility, we have a first primary responsibility to citizens in our own countries, because if they're not on board with us stepping up to fight climate change, both at home and around the world, they will withdraw political support from parties that are focused on doing that. And that's the challenge we have to tackle.
Yeah, I don't think that's going to work, but good luck to him. By contrast, here's Pierre Poilievre pointing out how Donald Trump doesn't need to fight with Justin Trudeau. He can just call up Canadian businesses and say, look what your own country's doing to you. Come on down to the United States. We're not taxing and destroying and regulating our companies. I think Poilievre is exactly right. The toughest thing, the worst thing Trump could do to Canada is get on the phone with our top 10 businesses and say, come on down, the water's warm, take a look.
First of all, we should be exempt from all these tariffs. I can't believe that Trudeau signed a trade deal with Trump that leaves open the possibility of a 10% tariff. I never would have agreed to that. I can't believe he signed on to a trade deal that keeps the softwood lumber tariffs in place. Harper got those lifted in 90 days as Prime Minister. Trudeau's had 9 years and 3 presidents, and not only are the tariffs back in place, they've been doubled, killing forestry jobs right across British Columbia. So I'll be fighting for an end to the softwood tariffs, an exemption to Buy America, like Harper has secured for us. But more importantly, I'll fight fire with fire. The Americans have taken a net $500 billion of our investment in the last 9 years. We were winning the investment war with the Americans before Trudeau, having more American dollars here than we had there. Why has the money left? Why is it pouring out of our country? Rampant tax increases by the Trudeau NDP Liberal government have pushed money out of our country to the point where American workers now earn $22,000 more than their Canadian counterparts. I want our money back. I will be axing the carbon tax, cutting income tax, cutting taxes on investment to bring home those hundreds of billions of dollars and to bring home production and paychecks for our people.
You know, one of the largest tech companies in Canada is called Shopify. You might not know that word, although you've probably seen it online. It's basically a way for ordinary people to sell things on the internet. It's just a user-friendly way to sell T-shirts or whatever else you're selling. And it's a huge Canadian success story. And in the early days of Trudeau's regime, he actually hung out with the entrepreneurs because they were a Canadian success story. They don't hold it in anymore. They are shocked by Trudeau's tax grabs. They're worried about the state of Canadian business. It would not surprise me if the amazing economic and tech success story of Shopify were to say, you know what? We love Canada and we created our business here, but Canada, well, not Canada, but the Canadian government doesn't love us. I think they would be the first company that Trump and his tech friends would pick off. But it's not just business. I mean, and it's not just Trudeau, who's really inconsequential in the rest of the world these days. Here's Vladimir Zelensky of Ukraine saying that with Trump, peace will come sooner. It's a very interesting thing to say. I presume he means that peace is a good outcome. And he is saying peace will come sooner with Trump than had Harris being elected. I don't know how that's a bad thing. I don't think it's a bad thing. I mean, it recently marked the 1,000 days since Russia invaded Ukraine, and Justin Trudeau and Aaron O'Toole and others took to Twitter talking about being with Ukraine until victory. What's that victory look like? Does it look like Ukraine, which is a fraction of the size geographically, economically, militarily, population-wise, defeating Russia, a nuclear armed power? I just don't see that military victory happening. What is victory for Ukraine? I've always said it's stopping the meat grinder of young Ukrainian men being just chewed up and spat out by this atrocious war. I wish that there had been that peace deal done shortly after the invasion, but it was scotched by Boris Johnson at the behest of the United States government. I find that to be shocking and bloodthirsty. And obviously, I don't support Vladimir Putin, who's an authoritarian. I don't support the invasion of Ukraine. But the idea that peace was within grasp and it was scotched by Boris Johnson is something that I think he should answer for the rest of his life. By the way, I saw this poll. Most Ukrainians want peace. So when Trudeau talks about victory, when Aaron O'Toole talks about victory, according to most Ukrainians, victory is getting a peace deal. How could it not be? I don't like the idea of Russia expanding and violating territorial sovereignty of others, but Ukraine will not have a military victory over Russia. In fact, I think right now is the fastest pace that the Russians have been having an incursion into Ukraine since the war started. Which makes it even more astonishing that Biden just made a decision about 2 days ago now. Of course, Biden is what they call a lame duck. That's the traditional term for a president who will be gone in a couple months, but still is the president until the new president completes the transition and is sworn in. It's Biden, not Harris. So Biden, who is deemed by his own party, his own inner circle, to not be mentally well enough, physically well enough to run in the campaign, he is still, on paper at least, the president of the United States. And Kamala Harris is still on paper the vice president. I'm guessing they don't get along very well. But in this lame duck period, when Donald Trump has the moral authority of just winning a huge blowout in the election, the popular vote, all the swing states, the Electoral College, the Senate, the Congress, the Supreme Court is Republican, Biden has announced unilaterally that he has now approved the use of long-range American-made precision weapons called ATACMS is the acronym. It stands for Army Tactical Missile System. It's a very, very precise, very long-range ballistic missile, very hard to stop. It's a very high-tech missile that requires American satellite guidance. So these weapons are not just American-made. They require American technical participation to guide them. And Joe Biden, until this moment, the war's been going on for 2.5 years, has refused to allow the use of these very powerful, very high-tech weapons because it would cross lines about American military personnel actually attacking within Russia itself. Of course, American advisors and American trainers have been active in Ukraine, but this would put missiles into Russia proper fired or assisted by Americans and American personnel. And Vladimir Putin has said that's a red line for him, that will change the nuclear decisions on his side, which I find absolutely terrifying. That might be a proper decision for a president to make. But during the lame duck period, when there's just 50 days, and who made the decision? Did Joe Biden himself make that decision? Did the blob make that decision? And why in the last this war has been going on for 2.5 years. I think that the blob, the deep state, is trying to get just the last few. I mean, they want to use up the weapons, the military-industrial complex. The gravy train is perhaps running out. I just find it an astonishing and dangerous decision to be made, and we don't even know who made it. I think that is actually really proving that the deep state is real. And I think that's actually making the case for Trump's rough appointees. Oh, hi, it's Ezra Levant here in Toronto with an important message because we need your help. Independent journalism in Canada is under attack. Government censors, big tech deplatformers, and the dying legacy media are all working together to maintain exclusive control on the information you receive. They don't want you to hear other voices like ours, and they really don't want you to be informed and to think for yourself. That's why the work we do here at Rebel News is so important. Our on-the-ground reporting, independent news shows, and special content you won't find anywhere else. It's all designed to give you trustworthy information and alternative viewpoints so you can decide for yourself. We don't get government money, and we are not owned by some big global conglomerate. We're funded by people just like you, so please support independent journalism and help us continue our work by subscribing and becoming a Rebel News Plus member today, right here on the page. Go to rebelnewsplus.com. Members get instant access to all of our shows, invitations to exclusive events, and access to our premium content like live event footage and documentaries you won't see anywhere else. Only Rebel News Plus members can join the conversation by participating in the comments section of our new website. That way you can have your say too. More than anything, though, you'll be able to take pride in supporting real, honest journalism, and you'll help our talented team continue to do the work to push back on the establishment. We really can use your help. We need it, in fact. So thank you, and enjoy Rebel News Plus.